All right, so in this video, we're going to look at the 5 essentials of the VLOOKUP function. We're first going to take a look at how the VLOOKUP works. I'm going to explain it using my Starbucks menu example. We're then going to look at the 4 different arguments of the function itself and what they all mean. I'm also going to talk about a common myth about sorting your data and why that's not always needed. And we're also going to look at why you need to anchor your table arrays and also how the column index is relative to the table array. So before we get into writing VLOOKUP formulas, let's take a look at how it actually works. So I have an example here of a Starbucks menu. This is one of my favorite examples. Basically, if you've ever looked at any food menu or ever ordered off of any food menu, you've done a VLOOKUP in your head. So you're already kind of familiar with this process. And basically the goal of the VLOOKUP is to return a result based on a lookup value. So we're going to look for a value and then return a result based on that value. So we can basically use it to answer questions. In this case, we want to know what is the price of the Cafe Mocha size grande from our Starbucks menu here. So basically what we're doing when we do a VLOOKUP is we're scanning down, or we're looking down vertically. That's what the V stands for in VLOOKUP. We're looking down a list vertically until we find the item we're looking for. In this case, we're looking for the Cafe Mocha. And then once we find that item, or once the VLOOKUP finds that item, it's then going to look across to the right a certain number of columns to find the price. So in this case, we want the size grande. That would be over 3 columns. This would be column number 1. Column number 2, column number 3 would be right here, and here is our price, $3.95. So that's basically how a VLOOKUP works, and this kind of analogy will help you when you're starting to write these formulas and preparing your models. And it's also very important to note that VLOOKUP always looks to the right. It'll always go to the right. It never looks to the left. All right, so now that we kind of understand how it works, let's go ahead and write a VLOOKUP formula. So I have a VLOOKUP formula right here, and we're basically just going to recreate this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this formula right here. And to start writing a VLOOKUP formula, we're just going to type the equal sign and then start typing the word VLOOKUP. And you'll see as we start typing there, it is automatically shown down here, and we can just hit the tab key on the keyboard to tab into it. And then we'll see the arguments here for the function itself. So these are the 4 arguments for the VLOOKUP function, which is the lookup value. That's the value we're going to look up. The table array, that's the range we're going to look in. The column index number, that's the column we want to return a result from. And then the final argument is the range lookup, which we're going to determine if we want to return an exact match or an approximate match. So I kind of have a simple definition up here of these arguments as well. You can use this as a cheat sheet and kind of print this out as you're getting started. But my simple definition here is just what are we looking for? Where are we looking? What range are we looking in? What column number do we want to return a value from? And then closest match, this argument is either going to be true or false, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So as we start typing our formula here, basically we just want to answer this same question, which is what is the price of the Cafe Mocha size grande? And of course, if we just scanned down the list here until we found Cafe Mocha in row 7, and then scanned over to the grande column, we could see that that's $3.95. So we want to use the VLOOKUP formula to return this price right here. So the first thing I want to specify is my lookup value. And I can either do that by typing here in quotes. I can just put this word in quotes here. If I can type, you could type it in like this and put it in quotes, or you can, instead of doing that, you can actually just select the cell, so we can reference the cell right here that contains the word. So that's much easier. Then I'm going to hit a comma, and now we want to specify the table array. So the table array is basically the range we're going to look in, and we always want to start that with the the column that contains the lookup values. So in this case here, column A contains our lookup values. So I'm going to select that column in our menu up here, and then I'm going to also select all of the price columns here. So this will be our table array, basically the table we want to look in. And VLOOKUP is always going to look down the first column in that table array to try and find the lookup lookup value. So now I'm going to hit a comma again, and now we want to specify our column index number. So this is the column that we want to return a result from. So again, in this case here, the first column would be the column with the values in it. The second column is the prices for the tall size. Third column is the price for the grande, which is the one we want, and fourth for the venti. So we want the third column. So we're just going to specify a 3 right here. I'm just going to type a 3 in. That'll tell VLOOKUP to return a value from the third column when it finds a match. And now the last argument is either going to be true or false. And this range lookup is kind of a difficult one to understand what range lookup means. But basically you can think of this as if you put true here, VLOOKUP is going to look for an approximate match, which we don't really want right now. We want to use an exact match because we want to find the exact word cafe mocha in this list right here. So we're just going to type false right here at the end. You can also just down arrow and tab over to fill that with false. And then we're going to close the parentheses. And it's just good to note that probably 95% of the time when you're starting out with VLOOKUP, you're going to have this as false. You're just going to default that to false because you're going to want to find an exact match in your lookup column here. So now once we have our formula, all you have to do is hit enter, and that will basically give us the price right there. So that's going to return the price of $3.95. So again, what VLOOKUP is doing is it's just going to look up this value right here. So it's going to look up this value, cafe mocha. It's going to scan down this column until it finds it. It finds it in row 7. Then it's going to go over 3 columns. So this is the first column, second column, third column, and it's going to return that price right there of $3.95. And that's what it does there. Okay, so now that we've seen how to write our first VLOOKUP formula, I want to talk about some other important things to know about VLOOKUP. The first is that VLOOKUP will stop whenever it finds the first match. So in this example here, I have the same formula that we just created in the last example. Basically right here, we're going to look up cafe mocha in this column right here, and VLOOKUP will stop when it finds the first match. So you can see here we have cafe mocha listed twice, but VLOOKUP is going to stop as it's looking down this column here. As soon as it finds that first match, it's going to stop and go over however many columns we specify and then return that value. So even though we have the same word down here, cafe mocha, with actually some cheaper prices, the VLOOKUP is never going to find that. So that's just an important point to note. Another important thing to note is that I commonly hear this myth that you first have to sort your data in ascending order when you're writing a VLOOKUP formula. And that's not true, at least not when we're looking for an exact match. So in this case here, we've specified the last argument as false. And again, that tells VLOOKUP that we want to look for an exact match of this word cafe mocha in this list right here. And since we're looking for an exact match, we do not need to sort this data in ascending order. You can see here that obviously it's not sorted in ascending order. We have a W before a C, and the formula is still working fine to return the price of $3.95. I hit enter there. You could see it's working just fine. Now, if you're using VLOOKUP for an approximate match, and typically you do that when you're looking up numbers and trying to calculate commissions or tax rates or something like that, then you will want to have your data sorted. So I can see where that myth or common misconception comes into play, because there are instances where you want to have your data sorted, but when you're looking for an exact match and your last argument is false, then you do not need to sort your data in ascending order. So you don't have to take that extra step and waste time doing that to just simply write a simple VLOOKUP formula like this. So we're now going to look at why it's important to always anchor down your table array references. And don't worry if you don't know what that means, I'm going to explain it right now. So basically in this example, we're going to take an order for the entire family here of all these different items. I want to figure out what they're going to cost, so I want to put the price right here so I know how much money I need to take to Starbucks to place this order. So I'm just going to type my VLOOKUP formula again here in this first cell, just tab into it, select the lookup value A17 here. I'll hit a comma, and now I'm going to select my table array again, which is this range here. And now right after I select my table array, you can see right now that this is a relative reference. It's not absolute reference. If I hit F4 on the keyboard, that will actually add the dollar signs right here in front of the column letter and the row number, and that tells Excel to anchor down this reference or to make it absolute. And that means when I copy the formula down, the reference will not change. It will stay A4 to D12, which is important. I don't want this reference to move down as I copy the formula down, or my table array. I want it to stay there. So basically just always hit F4 on the keyboard after you've selected your table array. I'm going to type a comma again. I know I want column 3 for size grande, and then we want false. I can down arrow and tab for false, and then close the parentheses and hit enter. So now I've got my price of $3.95. If I go down my list, Cafe Mocha $3.95 right there, and I can now just drag this down and copy it down to get all of my prices there. And if I just wanted to get a quick total, hold down the Alt key and press the equals and symbol or the equals key on the keyboard. That'll give me my sum for auto sum, and hit enter. And now I can see that I need $14.40 to complete this order. So if I did not anchor down my table array here, if I just select this, basically I can select this right here and I hit F4 on the keyboard a few times to cycle through to make this a complete relative reference, and I hit enter. If I then copied this down here, you can see that I get an error right here for Cafe Latte, and that's because that reference is now relative, and it's also moving down the same number of rows that I copied the formula down. So I copied the formula down 2 rows here. My table array also moved down 2 rows. You can see now that it's moved down here, and Cafe Latte is outside of my table range, and so basically it's going to return an error because the VLOOKUP can't find Cafe Latte anywhere in this first column of the table array, so it returns an error. So that's why it's always important to go in when you're typing this out to anchor this down. You can also just quickly select the tooltip here for the table array. That'll select the entire range there, and hit F4 on the keyboard once, and then hit enter. That will anchor down your reference, and then you can copy it down, and rest assured that that table array is not going to move as you copy it down. And the last important thing to know about VLOOKUP is that the column index is relative to the table array. So what does that mean? Well, basically I have my same formula here. Again, we're looking up Cafe Mocha and our table up here, and I'm returning the price in column 3. This column 3 is basically the column of the table array, the third column of the table array, not the third column of the worksheet. So if I were to, I can just select column A here and hit Control+ on the keyboard to insert a few columns. And now if I go back to my VLOOKUP formula, this is still going to be 3 to return the size grande. So what I mean is that the column index number stays relative to the table array. So it's not the column number of the entire worksheet, but the column number of the table array itself. So we're going to start here in column C and go over 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, to return the price grande. So always remember that that table or that column index number is going to stay relative. Another quick little tip for to figure out what that column index number is, if you have a really wide sheet with a lot of columns in it, when you're selecting this table array here, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the table array, and we're just going to reselect it again. When you're selecting the table array here, you can see that there's a little screen tip that pops up in the lower right corner there of the selection. It says 9R by 3C. That tells me that I've selected 9 rows by 3 columns. So this is a good indicator to tell me that I need to specify a 3 for my column index number, because I've basically selected 3 columns here. So the grande is 3 columns to the right. If I go over another one, you can see it's now 4C. If I wanted to return the size venti, then I would put 4 for my column index number. So as your spreadsheets get really wide and you go way out to the side, this could be tens or hundreds of columns wide, and that little screen tip there is a great way to quickly figure out what your column index number needs to be. And of course, you can also use formulas like the match formula to do that as well. And